It began on an ordinary, rain-soaked night when I finally decided to claim the old house I had long dreamed of owning. I'd passed over many modern apartments and brand new townhouses, but something about the faded wood, the creaking floors, and the storied past of this aging structure beckoned me. I knew from the very first visit that the house held secrets behind every locked door and dusty corner. I wasn't sure what those secrets might be, but the feeling that I was meant to uncover them was irresistible. The day I moved in was a blur of unpacking boxes, organizing old heirlooms left behind by the previous owners, and silent, almost reverent exploration. The house was a sprawling, two-story building with a peculiar layout, a narrow staircase that descended beneath the main floor to a basement I had scarcely noticed. I asked the realtor about it, and he merely shrugged, saying, "It's been empty as long as anyone can remember." I never thought much about it at the time. That first night, after I had set up a modest dinner at my reclaimed dining table and settled in with a book and a cup of lukewarm tea, I began to hear a sound that made me freeze in my armchair. It was faint at first, a soft, persistent creak that seemed to echo from below. I told myself it was just the old house settling in the cool night air. The rain pattered against the window, and all seemed calm. Yet, as the hours of darkness deepened, the sound grew unmistakably deliberate. A slow, measured thump, as if heavy footsteps were pacing down the hallway of the basement. At 2:13 a.m., I was finally roused from a restless sleep by the unmistakable groan of the house. I lay there in the silence for what seemed like an eternity before bolting upright. My heart pounded as I strained to listen. That sound, an uneven, shuffling noise, seemed to be coming from the floor below. I remembered the narrow staircase tucked away in a dark corner of the living room, its entrance partly hidden by a threadbare rug. Though I had ignored it at move-in, I now realized that the basement must hold more than just storage. Perhaps it was where the history of this house was kept hidden, locked away from prying eyes. I rose, heart in my throat, and made my way over to the stairs. Every step creaked and moaned beneath my weight, each sound amplifying the lurking dread that I couldn't dispel. With the beam of my phone's flashlight trembling in my hand, I descended into the darkness. The air was cold and musty, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something ancient and inexplicable. The narrow staircase led me downward in a slow spiral until I finally reached the basement door. Before I could push it open, I hesitated, swallowed hard, and listened. There it was again, the sound of footsteps, irregular and heavy, echoing like the measured pacing of an unseen presence. I pressed my ear against the cold, warped wood of the door, my skin prickling as I strained to catch even the faintest detail. There was silence on the other side now, yet I knew better than to trust that silence. Summoning every ounce of courage, I turned the rusty knob and slowly eased the door open. A weak shaft of light revealed a sprawling space that stretched into shadows, far larger than I'd imagined. The basement was cluttered with remnants of a forgotten era, old furniture draped in tattered sheets, stacks of dusty crates, and cobwebs glistening in the faint glow of my phone's light. In one corner, against a sagging wall, stood a large armoire draped in dark cloth. The atmosphere pressed in on me as I stepped inside. Every breath felt labored, as though I were inhaling the very grief and regret that had seeped into these walls over countless years. I wandered slowly among the relics, noticing details that made my skin crawl. Faded photographs in sepia tones that captured families long gone, letters and documents with dates that stretched back nearly 100 years, and odd trinkets whose purpose I could not decipher. I began to wonder if these items were deliberately arranged as if to tell a story, a message left by those who had once inhabited this space. In the midst of exploring, I stumbled upon something far more disturbing. A set of fresh muddy footprints leading from the heavy armoire toward a narrow doorway in the far wall. The print was unmistakably human, though the ground in this long abandoned basement had been undisturbed for decades. And yet, here were these footprints, small, erratic, like those of a child, fresh in a place that should have been long forgotten. My mind raced with possibilities. Had someone been living here in secret? Had a lost child once wandered these corridors and been trapped? I couldn't decide whether the footprints were evidence of a sleeping presence or the result of my own overactive imagination. Despite my horror, I felt an irresistible urge to follow the trail. With cautious steps, I advanced deeper into the basement, following the trail as it curved around old workbenches and piles of discarded newspapers. Every so often, I would stop, heart pounding, to listen for any sound that might confirm my worst fears. The passageway led me to a narrow hall lined with ancient, cracked stone walls. A few rusted light fixtures hung precariously above, casting weak, uneven illumination across a series of closed, wooden doors. The footprints stopped abruptly at one of the doors, a heavy door with peeling paint and a large, ornate knocker molded in the shape of a snarling beast. I pushed my fingers against the door, feeling the chill of the surface. For a moment, I considered retreating, wondering if I'd inadvertently disturbed something I was never meant to uncover. But something deep inside, perhaps a mixture of morbid curiosity and an inexplicable sense of duty, forced me to continue. I slowly opened the door, half expecting it to creak in protest. Inside was a small, private room that looked entirely out of place. Instead of the musty, cluttered chaos of the rest of the basement, this room was organized almost as if it were a study from a bygone era. A large desk dominated the space, its surface covered with yellow papers, faded photographs, and an assortment of old, leather-bound books. The walls were lined with shelves that held delicate porcelain figurines and antique trinkets. In the center of the room, perched on a pedestal, was a large mirror framed in elaborate, dark wood. For a moment, its presence startled me. Why would this mirror, so pristine compared to the decay around it, be preserved in this secret chamber? As I stepped inside, the door closed behind me with a definitive click, echoing like a final sentence in an old, tragic story. My eyes were immediately drawn to the desk. A journal lay open, its pages scrawled in a hurried, almost frantic hand. I approached slowly and began to read. The journal detailed the recollections of someone who had lived in the house long ago, a person whose words bled with sorrow and regret. The entry spoke of a terrible family secret, of a daughter taken too soon, of a promise broken by the cruelty of fate. The author wrote of a hidden room where she had concealed evidence of the tragedy, and of a mirror that was said to hold the soul of the lost child. I felt a chill that wasn't entirely due to the cold. The entries mentioned the child's name, Lillian, and described how, in the later years, the mirror would sometimes show a faint image of her sorrowful face when the author's anguish became too great to bear. At that moment, I understood that I had stumbled upon the basement's secret, a hidden chapter of the house history that had been deliberately locked away, waiting for someone to uncover the truth. The footprints, the secret passageways, and even the locked door, all of it made sense now. The author of the journal had been a desperate soul, trying to preserve the memory of her only child, Lillian, whose life had been snuffed out by a series of misfortunes and unspoken family rivalries. The mirror, preserved in that private room, was said to be the final connection between the living and the dead, a portal for the child's spirit to remain tethered to this world. I sat down at the desk, overwhelmed by a mix of sorrow and terror. My own heart ached as I read about a life filled with loss and guilt, the desperate longing of a mother to see her child one last time. Every word in the journal carried an emotional weight that made the air in the secret study feel nearly unbearable. I could almost hear the muffled cries of a broken family echoing softly through the silence. Outside the room, footsteps began to stir once again, this time gentler, as if in cautious warning rather than threat. The sound was deliberate, measured, and filled with a strange sort of sorrow. Unable to resist the pull of the unknown, I rose from the desk and moved toward the mirror. Its surface was flawless and dark, reflecting not just my own terrified face, but also a superimposed image, that chilled me to the bone. For just an instant, I saw a small figure, a little girl in a pale dress with tear-stained cheeks, standing behind me. I spun around, heart in my throat, but the room was empty save for the heavy silence and the ghost of grief that permeated every corner. I turned back to the mirror, only to see the figure again. The girl's eyes met mine with a desperate pleading, as though trying to communicate a message that transcended the barrier between the living and the dead. It was in that moment that I began to suspect that the footprints I had followed were not made by someone still alive, but rather by a spectral remnant, a child whose small feet had once padded innocently across these floors. Perhaps Lillian's spirit had roamed these corridors searching for the love and recognition that had been denied to her in life. The journal's final entry had ended abruptly, the ink nearly smeared by tears. If anyone finds this, know that I have lost everything. Lillian, my darling, I cannot keep you hidden forever. I beg you to be remembered. That plea reverberated in my mind as I stared into the mirror. For hours, I sat in that secret study, the storm outside intensifying as if echoing the tumult within me. I resolved then that I could not let this tragic story fade into oblivion. I gathered the journal, a few of the fragile photographs, and copies of the old newspaper clippings I had found scattered in the basement. With shaking hands, I documented every detail, determined to piece together the full truth of what had transpired in this accursed house. I made several trips between the secret study and the main areas of the basement, searching for additional clues, hidden compartments in the walls, engraved initials on ancient beams, faded handprints on long-forgotten artifacts. Each discovery pulled me deeper into the sorrowful tale of Lillian and the mother who had tried in vain to preserve her memory. The basement itself seemed to transform during my investigation. Shadows lengthened and shifted in a way that suggested the lingering presence of old sorrows. It was as if the very walls exhaled memories of heartbreak and remorse, and the ambient noises, dripping water, creaking floors, the soft hum of a long-dead air conditioner, blended with whispers of the past. I found myself speaking aloud, asking questions into the darkness, hoping that somewhere amid the echoes I would hear the answer. Lillian, can you hear me? I'd call softly, and sometimes for a heartbeat, I felt that the air vibrated with a response, a faint, indistinct murmur that might have been a sigh or perhaps a plea. Weeks merged into one another as I dedicated myself to unraveling the basement's secret. Each night, after ensuring the house was locked tight, I would descend into that labyrinth of sorrow with my camera and notebook, retracing the footsteps etched into the dust. I began to record the eerie sounds and capture images that defied conventional explanation. Flickering lights in abandoned corners, a child's laughter echoing faintly, though no living soul should be present, even moments when the mirror in the secret study reflected not my own face, but that of a small, weeping child. Sometimes I would find new sets of muddy footprints leading away from the study into even darker recesses that I had never seen before. I followed those trails with a mix of dread and determination, too afraid to look back yet compelled to uncover every hidden part of the tragic tapestry that clung to this house. One particularly stormy night, as the wind howled like a chorus of lost souls and the rain drummed relentlessly on the roof, I uncovered a final piece of evidence. In a cramped, neglected storage room off the main basement corridor, I discovered a trunk partially hidden beneath a faded tarpaulin. Inside lay a collection of personal belongings, a small, worn teddy bear, a lock of hair sealed in a faded envelope, and a delicate silver locket engraved with the initials R. My hands trembled as I opened the locket, and inside was a tiny, sepia-toned photograph of a little girl whose sad eyes looked eerily like the apparition I had seen. This confirmation shattered any remaining hope that the haunting was but my imagination. I was in the grip of something far more real than I could have ever believed, a curse of memory and mourning that had persisted in the silence of these walls. I spent the following days compiling every scrap of documentation, every photograph, every handwritten note. I reached out to local historians and scoured old records to understand the tragic fate of Lillian and her family. I learned that the house had once belonged to a prominent family whose reputation was marred by scandal and loss. Lillian, it turned out, had been a bright, gentle child caught in the crossfire of family secrets and a bitter feud that led to a series of misfortunes culminating in a mysterious fire. The tragedy was hushed up, the memories deliberately obscured by those who wished to forget. And now, her spirit, along with that of her grieving mother, seemed to haunt the basement, the last bastion of their shattered past. With time, I began to feel that my role in this unfolding drama was not that of a mere intruder, but of a reluctant chronicler, a person entrusted with the responsibility to remember and bear witness. I created an extensive archive, digitizing photographs, transcribing every journal entry, and even publishing fragments of the story on local forums, urging anyone who might have even the faintest recollection of Lillian to come forward. The response was both heart-wrenching and bizarre. Some recounted long-forgotten family stories. Others whispered that they'd heard similar sounds in their own homes. I became a repository for the collective grief of a past generation desperate to be seen. Yet even as I documented her tragic history, the supernatural events in the basement grew more insistent. At night, I would lie awake, my eyes fixed on the dark ceiling, listening to the rhythmic thumping of footsteps and distant voices. There were moments when I could feel a cold hand brush against mine as I walked past the closed storage rooms, or when a child's giggle echoed softly, only to vanish like a mirage. The presence in the basement was not malevolent. There was a deep, overwhelming sadness in its echoes, but it was insistent, a constant reminder of a wound that had never healed. One evening, after an exhausting day of investigation and record-keeping, I returned to the secret study to find it transformed. The mirror, which had previously held only fleeting images of a weeping child, now burned with a steady, ghostly light. In its reflection, I saw not myself, but a full, sorrowful apparition, a woman in an old-fashioned dress, her face etched with grief and resignation. She appeared to be silently pleading with me, her eyes silently demanding that the truth of her loss be acknowledged. For what seemed like hours, I stood there transfixed, unable to tear my gaze away from the haunting image. In that moment, I finally understood that the basement's secret was not simply a series of random hauntings. It was a call to remember, to honor the legacy of pain and tragedy that had been walled away for far too long. I gathered my courage and addressed the apparition aloud. I will remember you. I promise I will not let your story fade into oblivion. Whether it was my words or the raw emotion behind them, the air in the room seemed to vibrate with a bittersweet relief. The apparition slowly faded, leaving behind only the soft glow of the mirror and the quiet thud of my own heartbeat. I knew that the process of healing would be long and agonizing, but at least, for now, I had done my part to break the silence. Even now, as I live in a new home and try to bury the memories of that haunted basement beneath layers of routine and modernity, I often hear the echo of those footsteps late at night. I preserve the journal and photographs in a safe place and continue to share Lillian's story with anyone willing to listen. The basement's secret is now a part of me, a reminder that the past never truly dies, and that every house, every relic, can harbor stories too painful to forget. I have learned that facing the ghosts of our history, however tragic and unsettling, is the only way to bring some measure of light into the darkness. In the echoing corridors of that basement, I found not just horror, but the profound, aching beauty of memory, loss, and ultimately, redemption. And so, whenever I hear a stray noise or catch a glimpse of a shadow in a quiet room, I pause, remember, and honor those who came before me, lest their secrets be lost in the silence forever. The Basement's Secret is my chronicle of a journey deep into the heart of a house haunted by grief, where every creak and dusty footprint speaks of lives once lived and lost. In uncovering its hidden sorrow, I found the courage to confront my own isolation and the importance of remembering the past. May this story serve as a reminder that even in our darkest, most forgotten corners, the echoes of our history call out, waiting to be heard.